Hi there, Dave Palmer here, St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. We're continuing on our treatise on human nature, and we talked about the intellect, we talked about the sensible appetites, and now we are going to have a short video talking about the will and free will. What exactly does that mean according to St. Thomas Aquinas? And of course, it's going to be really interesting, and I think you're going to like it. So Thomas is going to start off here talking about the will. Does it desire something of necessity? Okay, do we have to want something? And of course, most people would say, no, of course not. We don't have to want anything, because then we wouldn't have free will, right? You may be a little surprised at what Thomas Aquinas says, because he is going to basically say, yes, the will does desire something of necessity. Now, just as a little bit of review, in the last video that I put up, I talked about the sensitive appetites, the things that we desire, like remember the nacho chips, the tortilla chips, and the salsa. They get put down at the Mexican restaurant. Do you say to yourself, gee, I decide that I want these chips. Okay, I've made that decision. No, you just want them, right? You didn't ask to want them. What about that pizza that I showed you? Here's another one. What about an ice cream cone? Most of us want an ice cream cone, but we don't ask to want the ice cream cone. It just happens that, it's part of our nature. We just we desire it, and we didn't ask for it. So some of the sensitive appetite is not voluntary, but is just kind of part of us, of what we desire. Now we can control it, and that's where the virtues come in, but that's for another video. So now we're talking about the will, and you got to understand first of all that the will is an intellectual appetite. Okay, it's not a sensitive appetite. It's something like we talked about in the last video, the desire to graduate from high school, to graduate from college. Okay, that's an act of the will. What about any time we pray? Okay, when we pray, we're exercising our will because we are desiring something, whether it be a better job or a healthy spouse or something like that. What about the desire to get married? If you want that perfect woman or that perfect man or a boyfriend or girlfriend. Okay, these are all exercises of the will. Okay, and this is what Thomas is talking about. We're no longer talking about the sensitive appetite and cockroaches and pizzas, and we're talking about intellectual appetites. And so here's what he says. Now this necessity of coercion, meaning you're forced, is altogether repugnant to the will. Okay, for we call that violent, which is against the inclination of a thing, but the very movement of the will is an inclination to something. Think about that. The very fact that you desire something, again, kind of like with those chips or that ice cream, you really didn't ask to desire that. It just was part of you, right? So we have this inclination to things. But the very movement of the will is an inclination to something. Therefore, as a thing is called natural because it is according to the inclination of nature, so a thing is called voluntary because it is in according to the inclination of the will. Okay, you follow? Therefore, just as it is impossible for a thing to be at the same time violent and natural, so is it impossible for a thing to be absolutely coerced or violent and voluntary. Okay, we can't say you want to get married or you want to graduate from high school. Okay, that would be coercing a will. In like manner, neither is natural necessity repugnant to the will. Indeed, more than this, for as the intellect of necessity adheres to the first principles, now get this, I highlighted in red, the will must of necessity adhere to the last end, which is happiness. Okay, so Thomas is saying here the only thing we must desire is happiness. We don't all desire ice cream. We don't all desire pizza. Okay, some do, some don't, most do. All right, we don't all want to graduate. Okay, we don't all want to get married, but we all want happiness. Okay, so that is of necessity. And so now you're thinking to yourself, well, does that compromise my free will? Does that mean I still have free will or do I not? Am I a robot? Am I just programmed to want something? Well, in a way we are. In a way we're programmed to want happiness. Okay, everybody wants to be happy. Even the person, God forbid, committing suicide or doing something horrible. They want to be happy. They're trying to alleviate their unhappiness. And they want to be happy, right? So we all desire happiness. Aristotle said this long before St. Thomas Aquinas ever did, okay? So now here's what Thomas says, and this is interesting because he's going to make a distinction according to the different kinds of creatures. Man has free will. Otherwise, counsels, exhortations, commands, prohibitions, rewards, and punishments would be in vain. Okay, there'd be no sense in them. In order to make this evident, we must observe that some things act without judgment, as a stone moves downward, and in like manner all things which lack knowledge. Okay, like a flower. A flower doesn't make any decisions. They don't know what in the world is going on, right? And some act from judgment, but not from a free judgment as the brute animals. Here he's talking about your dog and your cat. Okay, they have more judgment capacity than the rock and the flower, but still they're not working this out and making moral decisions and should I do this or shouldn't I do that. But there's a certain aspect of judgment, okay, but not a free judgment. But man acts from judgment because of his apprehensive power. He judges that something should be avoided or sought, but because this judgment in the case of some particular act is not from a natural instinct, all right? Remember when I showed, and you can hardly see it here, it's very small, but the diagram of composting, how you put the banana peels and the eggshells and the coffee grounds together, and all these little organisms start coming, and worms, and they all start working on it, and a month later you've got this nutrient-rich soil. They didn't make decisions to do that. It just kind of happened, right? That's instinct, and that's what he's talking about here. Okay, but we act from some act of comparison in the reason. Therefore, man acts from free judgment and retains the power of being inclined to various things. Now, particular operations are contingent, and therefore, in such matters, the judgment of reason may follow opposite courses and is not determinate to one. And of course, this includes women as well. Okay, so when we talk about man in the Summa, man means men and women. All right, so that's it. Isn't that interesting? Okay, we have all these different kind of creatures. Some have free will, some don't. But our free will is not so free that we aren't all driven to the ultimate end, which is happiness. Okay, we all have, and I'll tell you, we talked about God in a previous video. God is our happiness. So we all desire God. Even the atheist desires God. Okay? So just a reminder, this is what the Summa is about. It's about coming to know God, coming to desire God, understanding human nature, our intellect, our will, our passions, our desires, everything that it makes us kind of complicated, but how God is drawing us back to himself. All right? I hope you're enjoying it. Comment, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. This is St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone, and thank you for watching. I'm Dave Palmer. God bless you.